All right, what is going on, fellas? This is questions number 58. This is the 4,000 subscriber special. There's nothing special about it. It's just a standard question answering video, but I figured we'd celebrate. And I might even just post this before we actually hit the 4K because I was expecting that to happen yesterday, and I was going to make this video yesterday, and things slowed down. I was like, oh shit, I don't have a video for today. So I ended up not posting. And my plan for today was if I hit the 4K today, I was going to make this video. So I think I'm just going to post this, and hopefully this is the video that bumps me over the 4K, and then it doesn't look silly that I posted a 4K celebration without 4K subs. But we're going to get straight into the questions. I'm going to give a shot at answering them all. I've got one that annoyed me just a little bit that we're going to touch on after one or two. We're going to start on a positive note. I'm probably going to ramble a little bit. We'll see how many of these we get through. The first one. Do you think 2 arm exercises for biceps and triceps a week is good enough, or would you prefer to see more variety for arms? Are there any combinations of bicep-tricep exercise pairings that you think would work particularly well? So when we're looking at something relatively simple like the elbow, all the muscle fibers are oriented in the same kind of general direction. So what matters most is the fact that we're doing the right number of sets. The number of exercises probably is secondary to determining our results. If we're doing a full range of motion with relevant resistance, taking it to a relevant proximity to failure, the number of sets we're doing is probably how we're going to best quantify our results. Hypothetically, you could have one exercise and you could probably get pretty goddamn good gains if we're doing the right number of sets across the week and we're reaching up towards that maximum recoverable volume or whatever, however we want to quantify that. That being said, both the long head of the bicep and the long head of the tricep tie across the shoulder joint. So we can actually shift the emphasis of the exercises we're doing by changing where our humerus is relative to our rib cage. So some kind of overhead tricep extension is going to place a greater emphasis on the long head of the tricep. Something where our arm is behind us is going to place our long head of our bicep in more of a stretched position and probably bias it there. Something where our arm is in front of us, we're like putting the long head of our bicep in more of a shortened position, yada, 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 a tricep press down. So we could probably benefit a bit from including a little bit of variety in there. So yeah, number one most important thing, like what's going to determine 90+% of your gains is just the number of hard sets you're doing. Number of exercises is a very secondary factor, but we could take advantage of that to maybe drive some little novel shifts in muscular emphasis and maybe novel adaptation. I would say 2 probably would work. If we had one tricep press down type motion and one overhead extension type motion, we're placing the different muscular emphases. We're kind of splitting up that total working volume across a little bit different emphasis. That's fine. I mean, probably I would like to see some pressing in there. Maybe that's my bias as a strength guy, but some kind of dip or a close grip or a heavier compound I would love to see in there. But I would say 2 is probably fine. Same idea for the biceps. I mean, we could probably get away with 1 for the biceps, to be honest, but if we wanted to, we could say, okay, well, some kind of preacher curl where we're in front of us or something standing, and then maybe my secondary one would be some kind of incline curl where we're placing a greater length on the bicep. Those would be ones that would pair hypothetically pretty well. 2 is probably going to be fine. The major determinant is going to probably be your total number of sets, and you could probably rotate what those 2 exercises are with time as you feel they get stale. If you're not progressing on them anymore, you don't feel like you're connecting with it, you're not feeling like you're getting a good pump, all of these things might be a good idea to rotate the exercise. Because at the end of the day, elbow flexion is elbow flexion, elbow extension is elbow extension. We do have that flexibility built into our program. So, next one. Hey Sam, firstly, I'm well up for you making a video about your top 10 strength progression that you mentioned in the top 10 lifts video recently. I think it'd be an interesting watch. If similar layout to the previous video, I think it would be useful for a lot of folks. That's kind of what I ended up doing for the what I would tell my past self was like, what are the things that you figured out later that I wish you figured out now? That was kind of the intention with it. I could make more of a I didn't start seeing progression in this lift until this, but that's been a constant evolution. Like I saw progression in my deadlift when I did this and then it stagnated, and then I did this and it stagnated. So that would be a very long and kind of hyper specific to me video. So I thought that the key concepts I would teach my past self would be a better one, but I could do that if you guys would like me to do so. hopefully you guys can notice I'm a bit more energetic, and that's because I'm doing this in the morning, not after training. So I need to make a habit of this. It makes it a bit more enjoyable, I would say. The next one, my question is, do you think that working with a top set plus back down has any real benefit other than the enjoyment factor and working hard? My thoughts are that it could be beneficial for someone who needs more, people who are more strength-minded and feel a benefit from the strain without being as fatigued as a 1RM. Any opinion would be great. Yeah, it just depends, right? So top set back-offs for hypertrophy training, big benefit there is that we can start trying to progress in different rep ranges. If we have this idea that anywhere from 5 to 30 reps, blah, 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 you guys have heard my shtick, but anywhere from 5 to 30, assuming the same proximity to failure, is probably similarly hypertrophic. We know progressive overload is probably either a symptom of effective training or a driver of effective training, depending on how you like to think about it. What we probably want to do is we want to get stronger from all types of rep ranges, all the way from 5 up to 30. And if we're progressing these rep ranges, let's say one in the 5 to 10 range, one in the 10 to 15 range, and then one in this really high rep burnout range, if all three of these metrics are progressing, we're probably creating a demand for growth. So then it's on us to go home, eat in a way that fuels the growth, sleep in a way that fuels the growth, make those adaptations, do it again. So progressing anywhere in this wide rep range and getting stronger at a wide variety of rep ranges is probably a pretty good way to continually create a demand to grow. So for hypertrophy training, a top set and back offs is a good way to try to beat the books in multiple ranges. Maybe you have one top set in the 5 to 8, and then one, I don't know, 8 to 12, and then one 12 to 20, something like that. So we're progressing across these rep ranges, and the top set and back off lets us kind of hit upon those different rep ranges, because maybe not, they are maybe different drivers of hypertrophy with a little bit different emphasis. We maybe have some evidence to suggest that metabolite buildup in the muscles is like an independent driver of hypertrophy, independent from like the muscular like damage that we're doing. So maybe those higher rep ranges facilitate more of those like metabolic drivers, and maybe the lower rep ranges drive more of those mechanical tension type, muscular damage type drivers. Who knows? But maybe there's novel gains to be had from progressing across a wide variety of reps, and it makes it really easy to progress multiple rep ranges if we do a top set and back offs. For strength-minded people, it kind of depends, right? If we are in a hypertrophy phase, I would rather see them do ramping sets or accumulate straight sets, because we're just trying to accumulate a lot of good volume with good form. I don't necessarily think a top set's really all that necessary in a hypertrophy phase. If we move into a strength phase, kind of depends on what the person needs. If someone has a good bit of muscle and they're not very neurally efficient, right? You look stronger than you are. What we're really looking for is neural adaptation more than we are hypertrophic adaptation. So a top set with a higher intensity and then back offs with a little bit lower intensity might be a way to kind of tap into driving a little bit more neural gains. So let's say we have a pretty stereotypical workout of 3 sets of 5 at RPE 8. It's a great strength phase workout. Works for just about everybody to some degree. If someone falls into this category, maybe we would have them do one top set at a 9 and then the back offs at a 7. So we're kind of averaging out the RPE, and hitting a heavy set of 5 at RPE 9 would kind of elicit a little bit more of those neural adaptations we might be looking for. So that would be kind of one of the big benefits you could get there. Or if you're someone who you're efficient, you lift more than you got a right to, you're stronger than you look, all of your rep maxes project to below what you can actually hit for one, we might opt for accumulating, again, the straight sets of 5, and maybe get a greater average load done, and that will do more for you. Those would be my thoughts. I'm sure I'm missing a lot of stuff there, because there's a lot of things that go into, like, what are the small things that could be beneficial for ramping sets versus straight sets versus top set back offs versus wave loading, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of psychological, maybe physiological emphasis that could shift there, but those would be my thoughts. In your opinion, what would be an ideal strongman offseason, assuming your goal was to improve the big 3 and strict press during that time? Well, if it's if that's just your goal, it might not even be strongman. It would just look like pretty traditional training with squat, bench, deadlift, overhead, strict press. But if we're saying strongman, I would like to see in the off season someone working on either a farmer's or a yoke every single week. I would like to see them doing something dedicated for their grip every single week. I would like to see them doing either a carry or a load with a sandbag or a stone every single week, because those are kind of the fundamentals that are going to show up in so many shows. I think you could probably argue, depending on where you live, throwing weekly in the off season, if you're not great at it, might be worth the relatively low fatigue cost. But as far as the main stuff, I would probably just look to challenge those major things twice per week and then do my events. So what something I might do would look like is like, primary squat, secondary deadlift is day 1. Day 2 is primary bench press, secondary overhead. Day 3 is, say, secondary squat, primary deadlift. Maybe our secondary deadlift's an elevated height pull. Maybe it's an RDL. Maybe it's a stiff leg, depending on what you need to do. And then day 3 would be our primary overhead. Secondary benching. Probably include some upper back on those upper focused days. So some rowing, do some extra hypertrophy on the lower focused days for the lats, for the quads and the hamstrings, and then have an event day on Saturday where every single week we're doing a moving event, we're doing a loading event, we're doing some grip. And I think that would be a pretty productive off season for the majority of people. If you're stronger than you are good at events, I would probably like to see a little bit more event focused work sprinkled through the week rather than crammed into an event day. I think that event days are great if you're someone who really needs to work on your static strength and dedicate the work week to more traditional gym lifting. But if you're showing up to a strongman contest and you're getting beat by guys who are weaker in the gym than you and better at strongman than you probably need to spice a bit of strongman work through the week so you can place more emphasis on it, because ultimately what you need is to be better at strongman, and most people are somewhere in between. Hi, Odie. Let's see. Been loving the content, Sam. Been binging your contest last week and learning loads. I really admire your work ethic. Well, thank you. Bad timing because I missed my video yesterday and the day before. The work ethic's falling into question, but we're getting back on it. I just thought I've gained a ton of subscribers this month, probably thanks to Paris and that Paris response video, as well as the seal row setup video, doing a lot better than I thought they would. So I was like, oh man, we're up like 500 in the last couple of weeks. We'll hit that 4K. I'll just make that as soon as we hit it. And then I was just left without any backup plans when we didn't hit it. I know you said in a previous Large Lads that you dealt with some front hip pain before. I've been dealing with some lateral hip pain on one of my hips. Any recommendations other than unilateral leg work to overcome this? Well, I would say unilateral leg work, but you said other than that. So things like Cossack squats and curtsy lunges are just a good way to get you moving in the lateral plane a little bit. And that can be kind of helpful just to vary what we're doing, because most of our training we do in the sagittal plane. Getting a little bit of exercise in that lateral plane of movement could have a positive stimulatory effect. A lot of it's just going to come down to fatigue management. Other than that, I think warming up with a simple knee band walk just to drive some blood flow to just see if that has a positive therapeutic feeling effect. And if these things don't work, I would probably consult someone who isn't a random guy on the internet. But those would just be low invasive, low risk things that you could try doing in your warm-ups to see if you feel like it's driving some positive change. All right, we're gonna do it. We're gonna do the one I didn't like. I'm going to pull up my reply just to make sure I don't miss any of my key talking points. I'm going to try to get through this fast. I could probably ramble. Sam, you should discuss this topic on heavier loads by stronger lifters equating to more fatigue than weaker lifters, being that it's false. Okay, we're off to a good start here, even though every single good strength coach I've ever met is in agreement with me that there are greater total fatigues that come with absolute tonnage, and there's programming considerations that come with. Majority, yourself included, probably think that as you grow stronger, the workload you're doing is more fatiguing. And that someone weaker, example being if I squat 135 for a 3x5 at RPE 8 and someone who does 685 at 3x5 at RPE 8, you create the adaptations to get there. The stimulus is the same. Paul Carter has touched on this in the past and recently again in a talk with Sebastian Burka. If true, which it makes sense, and he's very credible, it would change a lot of philosophy on strength training at the high level, and yours included. Okay, simply because Paul Carter says something does not mean it's true. You could say Paul Carter is credible. I can line up a host of weightlifting coaches who were federally funded and had formal educations in weightlifting coaching and conducted research across thousands of national level athletes. I can cite a lot of people that I think are as credible or probably more credible than Paul Carter when it comes to this topic. We don't have formal literature on this because there isn't really an incentive to study this kind of thing. Nobody cares about strength training. We're not getting federal grants, so you can't just say, oh, here's a study. So we have to kind of go off of our anecdotal experience as coaches here. We don't have formal evidence. And I don't know how many elite strength athletes who are squatting 1,000 pounds Paul Carter has worked with. I can cite a lot of people that have actually started working with these people and gotten them good results. So if you had a weak person run the squat routine of Eric Lillibridge, they would probably regress due to how low the volume is. Eric Lillibridge progressed. So there's probably something that's more stimulative about a 1,000-pound single at RPE 9 than a 200-pound single at RPE 9. I don't think that's that crazy to say. And if we want to look to something somewhat formal, we can look to something that's very well established, something that has like an 80, 90 year history behind it of higher education on this topic, federal funding, tons of money behind it, and that would be Olympic weightlifting. And every single country around the world that's ever produced a good super heavyweight has their super heavyweights train at a lower proximity to failure on their strength movements, because of the greater fatigue cost associated. There's a reason you've never seen Lasha do hard pulls, hard snatch grip pulls, really hard squats. He's always leaving a lot in reserve because the fatigue cost there isn't worth the benefit at that point. And if you were to suggest that, oh, there's going to be this big pivot in strength philosophy, including yours, somebody's tried this. I've tried this. We've all tried this. Every strong person I know has tried to just ramp up the volume and do the volume that they did when they were weaker. We've all tried it. If it worked, we would all know. Or the person that's actually just doing a smaller person's training routine would be waxing all of the other super heavyweights. Everyone's tried it. I've tried it, and it didn't work. It just led to a very rapid overaccumulation of fatigue. So I don't think that because Paul Carter says this and it makes sense holds any more weight than if I say, well, Sebastian Oreb says this and it makes sense. Well, Sebastian Oreb has worked with the people that are exotically strong and probably has even more insight to this than Paul Carter. I'm not trying to take a dig at Paul Carter, but I just don't agree. And I also don't think that you have this paradigm shift that everybody at the world level of strength could suddenly be way stronger if we just did like weaker volume level routines. Now, I think what you're getting at here is, if we look at a very high level athlete in a lighter weight class, yeah, they handle a ton of work, right? Because as they train, their work capacity comes up. So let's say an elite 181 guy could be doing just as much or more volume than a novice 181 guy because he's trained his work capacity. But when we start getting into really high absolute tonnages, there is more than likely, everybody's kind of in agreement, a higher fatigue cost. And that's not to mention the fact that, yeah, sure, maybe your total work capacity, you've made the adaptations, you could recover and do it again quicker. We also have the fact that we need to factor in soft tissue damage because not everything is going to adapt 100% in proportion to one another. Maybe our ability to output force has adapted really well, but our ability to hold a lot of weight in our hands when we're squatting, we get crippling bicep tendonitis because it's a 1,000-pound squat. I'm rambling a bit here, but I didn't like this point. It's just Paul Carter says this and it makes sense, so you're an idiot. And it's not looking at what about all of the other experts that disagree with Paul Carter, because there's more people on this side than there are on Paul Carter's side. I don't know. I've tried it. It didn't work. I don't know what else to tell you. We're going to move on to the ones that didn't annoy me a little bit. I digress. So, next, any advice on working overnight and still getting the best gains possible? I'm working from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. 3 times a week, sleeping as much as I can while still having 1 to 2 hours to spend training and getting in the gym. I'm in a surplus and I'm sleeping 7 to 9 hours. I mean, I would try to aim for the 9 side of that rather than the 7 side of that. Stand-up running has talked about, like, I don't know to what degree it's variability in sleep schedule that's the issue, to what degree it's circadian rhythm. But I would say that you're always going to be functioning at a deficit when you have that variable sleep schedule. And if that's what you're doing right now, that's what you're doing right now. Let's try to optimize it. I think that buying like a UV light and exposing yourself to light when you wake up, even if that when you wake up is like 5 p.m., that might be beneficial in helping your energy levels. But it sounds like you're hammering the basics, which is, hey, I know I'm in a suboptimal circumstance right now. I'm going to make the best of it. I'm going to make the best of my nutrition. I'm in a surplus. I'm hopefully doing a good job with my macros, with my micros. I'm eating good, nutritious food, yada, yada, yada. I'm going to make sure I sleep as much as I can. And like, you know, I know it's suboptimal, but it's the best I can do in this circumstance. I'm going to make sure I do my training well. It sounds like you've got a good understanding, which is, hey, I know this is a deviation from what is like hypothetical best practice, but I'm going to do the best for this scenario. And I think that's something a lot of people could learn from. Like if you're on vacation, yeah, you're not going to be able to nail your variables to the same degree you probably could when you're at home in routine. But that being said, you should still do the best you can for the circumstances and do damage control. If you could just order an extra, like, thing of food and put it in a to-go box and then not miss a meal, if you could go to bed a little bit earlier, if you could take a nap, if you could get into the gym. Everybody's circumstances are different as far as what their damage control would look like, but we all want to do the best we can in our circumstance. And I think sometimes because people panic and they realize that they're not doing exactly what's perfect, they give up entirely instead of trying to hit that 50-60% good enough mark and do a little bit of damage control. I see that a lot when people go on vacation and I coach them. What's the craziest, once-in-a-lifetime, most balls-to-the-wall program routine you'd like to try if you had 8 to 12 weeks of uninterrupted time? I know you'll get perfect recovery and no stress, no upcoming competitions. You just can't train like you do normally. Well, I've always said that something interesting about Bulgarian is like Bulgarian being working to maximum many times per week, maybe many times per day, depending on how literally we want to take it. If we're talking like Abujayev's true Bulgarian, it's multiple times per day working to maximum. People have modified that to be daily. People have modified that to be 3 to 4 days a week. And it really holds some value in letting you express as much strength as you possibly could due to that inherently sky-high specificity and driving those neural and maybe technical adaptations. So whatever you could squat with like your current base, with your current muscularity, you'll kind of get up towards that pretty quick. So people will say, in the first month on Bulgarian, I had 80 pounds to my squat, and then I hit the hardest plateau of my life because I'm not building the base at the same time. I believe that was the experience of Max Aeda, who actually trained under Abujayev, where his squat shot up initially, and then he hit the hardest plateau ever because there's no base building. Maybe in the Bulgarian system, there may have been some PEDs involved to allow for this continual background base building, even from this extremely low volume training. That being said, I don't think I'm lifting as much as I could based on my current muscularity because I'm always trying to progress my upper end strength alongside my muscularity rather than top out where I'm at. So I believe I've probably got some amount of untapped potential at my current level of muscularity. So I guess if I couldn't do what I'm doing right now, I would run a block of modified Bulgarian where I'm working to heavy singles on all the lifts that I'm interested in, just to see kind of where I would get in that 8 to 12 weeks. We're assuming the recovery is perfect, I'm sleeping good, my risk of injury is at least lower than it would be if I was jumping into this, working a 9 to 5 job, missing meals all the time, sleeping poorly, and then trying to run Bulgarian. So maybe I make it through in one piece, maybe I don't. But I'd be very curious to see what I could squat, bench, deadlift, overhead at this level of muscularity in 8 to 12 weeks, if that was the dial I turned. Next one. Hey Sam, need some insight on block periodization. After I finished a peaking block, how to start into another volume block. I mean, for me, after peak week, it's very hard to get into volume and my body gets very sore from volume. I tried to ease into it before, but not successful. Any advice? I just jumped straight into it. I know my work capacity is going to limit me before my muscularity, but I'm getting quite sore, so I'm getting some novel adaptation more than likely. The first week or two, you're going to be sucking wind. That's how I've always done it. Hypothetically, if we look at like a traditional 3-block phase training cycle of hypertrophy, strength, peak, you could probably say that work capacity could be a 4th one you could throw at the beginning, where we try to build up this big base of work capacity using limited rest intervals, maybe moderate to high reps, using some conditioning means, using some HIIT. So like, okay, cool, we build up this big work capacity, then we go apply that work capacity to a hypertrophy phase. We are not limited by our work capacity, we're limited by our musculature. We put on this good bit of muscle, we then train that muscle to be strong, and then we learn how to express that in terms of a 1RM, hypothetically, in terms of like technical and neural adaptations that might happen in the peaking phase. So you could include a conditioning phase of a week or two if you wanted to, or you could jump right in, or you could bring your volume low, so you're only hitting, let's say, 3 working sets of 6 to 10 per session in your hypertrophy phase. The next week you hit 4. So you could like volumize in building volume. I jump straight into it. It sucks. And there's reason to believe that a rapid spike in training volume is kind of dangerous, but I find that if the load is low enough, so we drop all the way back to 55-60%, and I'm limited by my work capacity, I've never gotten hurt on that first week of a hypertrophy phase, knock on wood, because I'm held back so much by my work capacity that it's been a non-issue. So that would be my personal thoughts and my personal experience. If you want a more detailed answer, let me know. I could probably get into that. For the pursuit of front squat strength, I'm doing beltless high bar squats for volume on my secondary day. I find without a belt, I collapse easy and try to use my back instead of my quads. This shows I have a weakness, so should I lower the weight and perfect the beltless high bar, or just put on a belt and have a better movement pattern with heavier weights? I think you should be able to put up decent numbers. So I'm assuming when you say you're putting in volume work, you mean like, let's just say 6 to 10 rep range. I think you should be able to put up good performance in the 6 to 10 range, probably without your belt on. There might be a miscuing of your position if you need the belt that badly, or there maybe could be a lack of strength there. What I might do is I might spend a couple of weeks beltless and then spend a couple of weeks belted as you ramp up in your volume. Or not, the volume's ramping up. The volume stays roughly the same. The weight ramps up. So maybe you could do the first 3 weeks of volume beltless and then the latter 3 if you're running a 6-week program with the belt. I would probably make some time to train without the belt if it's that glaring of an issue for you. But that being said, I do think as things get heavier and as you push things, the real goal of those high bar squats in developing the front squat is the leg strength. That's kind of what we're using those for. But the front squat is a lift notoriously limited by trunk strength. And so challenging your trunk strength a little bit more on your high bars could be good. I would probably do a bit of both would be my best answer. Best way to address a weighted pull-up plateau. I'm not in one currently, but in preparing. Usually you just have to kind of assess. You're like, okay, well, am I recovering well? Could I recover well from a little bit more? Do I bump the frequency? Do I bump the volume? Do I bump the intensity? Usually it's going to be, if you're recovering well, you're probably going to turn up that frequency a little bit, or you're going to turn up the volume a little bit. Varying your rep ranges. There's a lot of different ways. That's kind of hard to say. I don't know when people like bust through a plateau this way. I mean, it kind of depends on why you plateaued. Are you overdoing it or are you underdoing it? Because how you're going to bust through that plateau is going to be the exact opposite depending on the answer. I hope I didn't come off like a dick to the guy with the Paul Carter question. I don't want to be a dick. I appreciate you participating on the channel. I'm just a little bit frustrated at the suggestion that there's this thing I have never considered, because I've been doing this for like 10 years and I've been consuming as much information about it as I can. I've seen people present that argument and I've seen people present the counter argument, and the vast majority of people that I think are putting the most skin in the game and have the most experience, because we have to kind of go off of coaches' anecdotal experience, right? Because a single person's anecdotal experience, pretty meh. We have science, we have peer-reviewed studies across a big group, and we could raise some criticism of, okay, well, those are on untrained people. It's very hard to find a robust, really well-done study on a large number of high-level lifters, because there aren't even a large number of high-level lifters, right? But that's a good, very high level of evidence. But if we don't have that specific high level of evidence, which we really don't, I would say personal anecdote falls pretty low. The best thing we could look to is a high-level strength coach who's worked with a lot of people. So he's seen the response of a lot of high-level athletes. And I don't know. I'm not going to harp on this one anymore. I apologize. I work a fairly physical 12-hour day when I'm on site. Is it better getting up really early to lift, still a bit sleepy, tired, training fasted, getting up at 3 a.m. blows, or waiting until after work, fairly worn out, cuts into my own time more, harder to switch off and go to sleep after? That's a good point. I know this probably isn't an A or B binary question, but look forward to you rambling on the matter. As always, check your Discord PMs. I'm trying to get to it. I'm trying to get to it. That's a good question. Like you said, there isn't a cut and dry A and B answer there, because it's largely personal preference. Lots of people find that while they're a bit physically drained, if their job is kind of monotonous, they have that mental reserve when they finish to kind of switch on for training. And it goes better that way. Other people find that if they optimize their morning routine, okay, I just need to eat this, I need to drink this amount of water, I need to make sure I intake this amount of salt. My performance sucks for about a week or two, and then I start adapting to that morning training time. I find little tricks in my routine to make that performance fall off less. So eating a bigger dinner, having a really dense carbohydrate meal beforehand, making sure we rapidly improve our hydration status as soon as we wake up, maybe drinking water overnight, depending on how much that ruins your sleep, having to get up to go pee. So it's very variable, to where I think you should probably just try both, because I know people that perform at a high level both ways and hate the other one. I know lots of guys who swear that like, okay, well, I'm just going to do it fresh in the morning because at least I'm not tired from work. I know I have to make these considerations, but then once I'm used to it, I'm good to go. Back when I was in school, I used to train. In high school, I used to train before school because I had track after school. And my performance was very poor for about 2 weeks. And then I started to find little tricks, and my body started to adapt to it. And I think there's probably some hormonal changes in terms of something spiking earlier in the day. It ended up working up quite well for me. Whereas on the other hand, I know a lot of guys, they get off a hard day of work and prefer to train afterward. Just eat a good meal. At least you're well fueled. You've probably been drinking water all day. You're in a bit of a better spot, and then you could just go give it your all at the gym and then check in for bed. I would say those would be kind of my initial thoughts into like what might go into your thought, like your pros and cons analysis. The next one. How much rotation of isolation / bodybuilding work do you feel is necessary? I know / think you love pushdowns for a hella long time, so not much rotation needed. So let's say we're seeing good gradual progression. It's never really needed unless we start to run into specific issues. You're like, my knee is starting to get stressed out on the hack squat. I'm going to rotate to full range leg presses. Sure. But let's say we're managing our fatigue well. We're recovering on a weekly basis. As long as we're moving forward, it's never needed. Ronnie Coleman did the same back routine for 20 years. And while you could say, just because Ronnie did something doesn't mean it's good, he probably would have succeeded doing anything. Sure, but that means it's not necessary. It means it might be beneficial, but it's probably not necessary. There's tons of jack guys I know who have been doing the exact same shit forever because it works for them. So no, I don't think that I think rotation of exercise is something that you can play when you really fail, like you stop connecting with an exercise. I'm sure this has happened to all of you guys. You do an exercise for a long time and then you almost lose your mind muscle connection on it because you've been progressing it for so long. And even if you drop back the weight, you don't really get it back. It just seems to get stale. And if you rotate to a different exercise and then rotate back, you get that mind muscle connection back. You can rotate it then. If your progression stalls, for hypertrophy training, I don't know. I like Dr. Mike's ideas on this, which is just like run through a progression for quite a while on an exercise. Once it gets stale, you've got probably 2 or 3 other exercises you feel work similarly well and hit a similar movement pattern. You rotate it, go, rotate it, and you have these major movement slots. And you have a couple options, all of which you feel work really well. That's why there's no one best exercise. There's probably 3 or 4 that fill that role really well for you. For strength training, depends. I mean, a lot of it is we have some flexibility. So it's like if you start to hate an exercise, we could probably switch it to something similar. That way you're more likely to continue working hard on it. But I don't think a ton of rotation is necessarily needed, especially if we're periodizing our target rep ranges. Like maybe early in a training cycle, we're looking for 15s, and by the end, we're looking for 8s. Well, when we roll into a new strength training cycle, we drop back to 15s, we'll probably be able to make some new novel gains and hit some new volume markers with our 15s. So I don't think it's the most important thing in the world, but it's not useless. And if you start to get like maybe small overuse injuries from your accessories, you certainly shouldn't be getting overuse injuries from your accessories, so rotate them. Obviously you shouldn't be getting overuse injuries from anything, but you certainly shouldn't be getting it from supplemental work. Do you think barbell rows should be done in a Yates style or more bent over if the goal is lat development? I mean, I think they both work pretty well, frankly. I think you could place a little bit more stretch if you're more bent forward, and that's a big benefit. And I think that you're less likely to be limited by your low back if you're more Yates. So they both have pros and cons. Both are very good lat exercises. Obviously, the Yates being more upright, you're going to hit more rear trap, rhomboid, upper trap, rear delt in there, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad lat exercise. I would say, I don't know. I don't think one of them is inherently better than the other, frankly. I don't have a good answer for you. Damn, 4K came really fast the last couple of weeks. Yes, it did. I was not expecting the Paris response video to do particularly well, and I wasn't expecting the chest supported row video to do particularly well. So that came by surprise. What's your take on higher frequency, lower intensity style training? For example, deadlift 3 times a week. So, we've got 3 things. We've got our intensity, we've got our volume, and we got our frequency. It depends. If someone really needs to work on their technique, doing something often and doing it with a lower proximity to failure, so deadlifting with lower intensity 3 times per week might be very effective for them. If their technique is good and they've got a reasonable level of muscularity, that might not make as much sense because we're not using that intensity, that driver of neurological gains maybe. So It's got a time and a place. I don't think it's like, oh, this is the way. I currently use more of a higher frequency, higher intensity, and very low volume. So I will go heavy for minimal volume 2 to 3 times a week for my deadlifts. And that's been working quite well given where I'm at. My technique is better than it has been. My muscularity is probably good enough to pull a bit more than I pull. So I'm kind of pulling that lever. And I've trained myself to be able to pull heavy from the floor 2 to 3 days a week, which before I thought was something that would be never achievable. But it's always good to bear in mind that the human body can adapt to a wide variety of different training demands. The question is always, well, should I try to get my body to adapt to this? And in this case, it paid off well. That would be my thoughts. Nothing too detailed for you, unfortunately. How many clients are you coaching roughly at one time? About 50. I think I'm a little bit over that right now. I'm probably a little bit over stressed right now. So probably about 50. Preferably one day I would like to maybe get more income from alternate means, whatever that might be. Maybe the YouTube, maybe I stop being a lazy piece of shit and I do something cool on the Patreon, supplement that income and get down more towards 20, 30 guys, and be able to spend more time per person. That would be very nice. Do you think isolated calf training is necessary / recommended to increase squat strength? Pete Rubish recently did a video on the fitness industry myths, and he said isolating the calf training isn't worth it. Necessary? Fuck no. Super no. I can answer that definitively. Tons of guys have built up their squat without training their calves. Everybody probably could. Is it recommended? It's an easy way to keep your ankles mobile. I don't know where he's at right now, but in the past, Pete Rubish had some suspect ankle mobility, and maybe full range calf training could have been a way to keep that ankle mobility in check. It takes literally like 2 seconds to hop up on a block and do some single leg calf raises. So I think as far as investment of time, it's not the worst. If you've got any propensity towards ankle injuries, then obviously it's worth it. But for the vast majority of people, I don't think it matters that much. I find it to be an easy way to keep a joint moving. You know, we have this idea that if you want mobile hamstrings, do full range of motion RDLs. Usually if a muscle is strong in a lengthened position, you're not restricted out of that position. So if we want to improve mobility, full range of motion resistance training is the way. Lots of people say their ankle mobility sucks, but then don't apply that same idea of full range resistance training of maybe the tibia and the calf. I don't know. Do I think is it worth it? It's hard for me to say it isn't worth it because it literally takes me 1 minute if I want to do one set, and that drives at least some of those mobility gains. So I guess I don't necessarily agree. I don't really disagree. I don't really care, to be honest. Whether people train their calves or not isn't the end all be all to me. How to be the best at moving furniture. Been doing Zercher holds and carries, and I feel like I could lug a fridge up a flight of stairs. Yeah, I would say Zercher carries is really good, especially if you can do them on a yoke. Awesome. Sandbags, I'll shill for those forever. They work really well. So I would say, yeah, pound for pound, best furniture moving accessories probably would be like sandbag, picks and carries and extensions, and then Zercher for carries. Probably would make you the furniture moving goat. So that would be my answer. Best strongman implements to incorporate for grappling sports. That's a great question. I would say some of my favorite things for grappling sports would be, I'm sure you already heard it, they're very popular for a reason. That'd be towel pull-ups. I think those are a phenomenal exercise. Eventually doing weighted towel pull-ups, you got to get a beefy towel, but I think those are the shit for grappling sport. I've already mentioned this once before, but the sandbag, I think you can do a lot of different things with it, and you're going to find that when you go to roll or when you go to wrestle or whatever the hell you do, you're going to find that if you've been doing some squats on a sandbag, lunges on a sandbag, picks, extensions, over shoulder, you're going to feel a lot like you're able to apply that strength to a human being a lot better. It builds strength in a lot of the right areas. I think for grapplers, bicep strength is very helpful. Grip strength is very helpful. I would say those are kind of the big two. I would also say that of other strongman equipment, I would say sandbag number 1, and I would probably put farmers at number 2. Again, kind of pulling musculature probably is a little bit more important than the pressing musculature. Grip strength is always a high priority. I would say something like farmers of traditional strongman events would be another one. Maybe bag toss just for some explosive work of the hips. You don't even have to be tossing it over a bar, just tosses for height or tosses for distance for some explosive hip extension. If I were to take common strongman disciplines, those would be some that I find could be applied to a lot of athletes. Life is super stressful right now. What It's the best I can do in 4 40-minute sessions per week. I was thinking one single of squat, bench, dead, an overhead press at 9 per week, and then throw in hypertrophy work to failure on hack squats, machines, RDLs. I would probably not just do a single every week. I feel like if your life is pretty stressful, you would see some initial gains from doing a weekly single, and then that might taper off a good bit. I'd probably just do some basic periodization of a couple weeks of 8s, a couple weeks of 5s, a couple weeks of 3s on these big compounds, rinse and repeat. If you've got time, do some accessories. I'd probably try to fit in, I'd probably just do I'd probably go upper, lower, squat, dead, bench overhead, squat, dead, bench overhead as our 4 sessions. Try to just overlay some periodization, get in some upper back work on top of the pressing. I think you could probably get in some pretty good work in 40 minutes on these motions, assuming you aren't mega strong. You can get your warm up quite abbreviated and find, okay, well, what is my bare minimum? You can see this in weightlifters who do 2-a-day training or 3-a-day training. They've really honed in on what is the minimum that I need to do to perform well and reduce my injury risk and do no more, because I don't want to spend any more time doing this shit. You can hone in on, okay, I need to do this, and then I'm good to go. And I can just gradually add weight to the bar and then get after it. And trimming time off that first half of the workout and getting into the work could let you get in a lot more productive work. Also supersetting, I probably superset presses and pulls and like deadlifts and abs. So every time you do an overhead, you do a pull up or some shit. Every time you do a bench, you do some kind of row machine or something. In 40 minutes, you got 20 minutes of pressing and rowing, and you got 20 minutes of overhead and pull ups. You're gonna get a good ass upper body workout. Every time you do a pull from the floor, you do some abs. Maybe every time you do a squat, you do a hamstring curl. You can probably get in some very good high density and effective training. I wouldn't necessarily use the singles if I were you. That being said, it would probably work. Most things work if you work. Is it a myth that more body fat you have, the more muscle your body can naturally hold? Sumo wrestlers have the most muscle mass. That's not untrue. The most muscle mass on a person that's natty is probably going to be some 400-pound guy who's an athlete. Part of that is they're just bigger, right? They're moving more weight. Things get tricky, right? Because you're like, okay, well, then that guy could cut down and show off that he's got more body mass than everybody else. But when you're cutting down, naturally, you have hormonal responses. You're not going to be able to retain muscle for this really prolonged cut. Let's say you are a 400-pound guy who would be super diesel and jacked at 250, and people are like, holy shit, 250 natty, like lean, that's nutso. I don't believe that. Well, no, he does have, under all the fat, there is that. The problem is that on his way down, he doesn't have anabolic steroids, which are extremely muscle sparing, to hold on to the majority of that muscle while in a prolonged deficit. So that's kind of what throws a wrench in that equation. It's not the body fat that allows you to, it's not that body fat allows you to hold the muscle. It's that being really heavy in a prolonged bulk for a really long time lets you build a lot of muscle. I don't know. I want to make sure I'm not talking inaccurately here, but I would say kind of what you're getting at isn't necessarily a myth. Yeah, just giant fat people that are really strong probably have the most total lean body mass, but if they cut down to try to display it, they would lose a good bit of it because of how far they have to cut down. And that's why a natural bodybuilder probably would not benefit from getting morbidly obese. What's your opinion on Brian Allsru's style of giant set training as it pertains to strength gain? I mean, it's probably a slight deviation away from what is hypothetically optimal. More traditional rest times, more traditional strength training, I probably think if you applied similar effort would probably give you a slightly better result. But building up work capacity and mental toughness, I think that lots of times people can be more mentally invested in their workout if it's kind of nonstop, go, stay intense, stay off the phone. So I could imagine for some people actually yielding better results due to the intensity they're able to apply to their training. But if they were able to apply similar intensity to a more traditional approach, it probably would be a little bit better. But I think it's very good. I think that building of work capacity and toughness and intensity is very helpful for someone to go through at least somewhere in their lifting career to kind of learn what an actual hour-long tough training session feels like. You mentioned you have some videos you like to watch before lifting. Please share those. No, it's not cringy. I watch some of yours before lifting. I just like to watch the Eric Spoto 705 bench before I bench press. I like to watch the Klokov, I want to say it's 353 strict overhead, 360, something like that from a power weekend before I overhead press. I like watching Derek Kendall before I front squat. I like watching Toshiki before I do some back squats, maybe Dan Green when I back squat. And I like watching Rano Heinla. I like his pull. I also like Tom Martin's pull before I deadlift, and those get me fired up to see how strong people can get. How far will you try to advance in your strongman journey? Nationals, pro? Honestly, I don't know. I'm just going to try to get as strong as I possibly can. I think I've got a ways to go. I am only 24, and I think that I've got a lot of weight to gain still. So I like to think that I haven't really tapped my potential. I would love to see like a 600 bench and a 405 plus strict press, and I think I could probably pull a lot more than I'm pulling right now. Maybe do a respectable squat at some point if I get my shit together, and then continue training my events, and just wherever that takes me, it takes me. But my goal is just to get as strong as possible. Even if I wasn't competing in strongman, I'd probably be doing basically the exact same training. It's just something I do for fun on the side. I just really like strength training. Where are the daily videos? Any progression tips? Any progression technique for accessories, or should one focus on volume? Where are the daily videos? I already gave you my excuse. So there you go. Any progression techniques for accessories, or should you just focus on volume? I think that if you've got a rep target system, maybe early in the training cycle, maybe that rep target is a little higher and then it comes down, that can just make everything kind of progress alongside one another. I know Ed Cohn was a big advocate for this, where he would taper his target reps on his accessories as he peaked to try to drive this whole body peaking response. I don't necessarily think that's the best fatigue management strategy. Also, in regards to that earlier one, somebody should tell Ed Cohn that he needs to do more sets of squats and squat twice a week, and he would get way better gains, because that works for everybody else who's weaker. Yeah, no, I mean, you could build in some kind of like peaking periodization, staying within the realms of hypertrophy to the accessories, or you could not. That's largely going to come down to personal preference, and I don't think it's going to come back to bite you either way. You could just focus on volume and working hard and get a lot of those benefits. So that was the last question. I'm sorry for the little bitter rampage in there. I don't know, that like I saw that first thing in the morning when I was going to brush my teeth, and for some reason I just was not in a good mood today, and I was like, fuck this guy. I'm sorry. I know I'm being a dick about it. I don't agree with you. I hope that you extend me the olive branch, and we can agree that, who knows, there are experts on either side of the debate. I think there's more experts on my side of that debate, but I'm sorry. I'm sorry for being rude. I appreciate you, boys. Thank you for watching my video. Sorry for sitting through the rant. I appreciate you all.